he was known simply as the Son of Sam, a relentless killer who terrorized New York City during the 70s, killing 6 people, wounding 7 others. Now, after all these years, David Berkowitz, the man who said a satanic dog told him to kill, proclaims God is helping him win his battle with inner demons. He even has the help of a growing flock of Christian followers who believe the mass murderer is an apostle of the Lord. Steve Fishman snagged the first interview in 7 years with David Berkowitz for New York Magazine. Lisa Singh has also spoken to Berkowitz, and excerpts of her interview are featured on the magazine's website. All right, Steve, after all this time, what's the guy like today?
The surprising thing about David Berkowitz is you walk in the room, you expect Son of Sam, and there is this polite, middle-aged, paunchy, quiet, retiring guy who could be a middle-aged civil servant thinking about retirement.
What's he like when you start pressing him about the story?
Well, David really doesn't like to talk about the Son of Sam killings.
I can't imagine why.
I know. Yeah. His attitude is, listen, it was 30 years ago, enough already. And it sounds glib and it sounds, like he's basically pushing it away. But his agenda now is to talk about his Christian rebirth. The way that the Lord has saved him and the way that his life has changed. The interesting thing about David is that, ostensibly his life has changed. I mean, he's in prison. He's not doing any harm.
He kind of ministers in prison.
He's the inmate pastor. He is involved with, believe it or not, a food drive to help poor people in Queens. He sends Bibles to ministers in Africa, one of whom named his son after David, Kwaku Berkowitz. So he is reaching out. He's done 2 videos, which are distributed to Christian ministers.
To what does he attribute the conversion? What happened?
David's story is that in 1987, he was despairing, and in his cell, an inmate had approached him and given him a Bible, and he had opened that Bible to Psalm 34, fell on his knees, started crying and praying, and the Lord came into his life.
Okay, now the thing that I found particularly interesting, from a psychological point, some people maybe from a religious point of view, his followers seem to believe that he basically proves, he's the proof for the existence of Satan. He says now with his Christian conversion that it's clear Satan possessed me from the time I was a child or from birth or whatever, and my conversion shows that the Lord is at work and Satan can be defeated and all this kind of thing. Is that the gist of why he's collected his followers, and some are calling him an apostle?
Some are calling him an apostle, and I think that you're generally right, that they do see in David this dramatic testimony or dramatic kind of story that they almost feel is biblical. Walks out of the Bible. There are parallels to Paul's testimony that this is the kind of thing that you hear them saying. His life in prison kind of makes him Christ-like in his lifestyle.
Lord. I'm sorry.
I know. This is what but this is really what people say, and it is interesting that people glom on to David. I think the one striking thing about David is that he's always been a little bit of a pale, mild-mannered character in whom people have always seen things.
He's kind of a blank slate.
He's a little bit of a blank slate, and so people have always been able to kind of impose their view of him on them, even going back to the killings.
Well, I want to put up a graphic, and this is from the New York Magazine interview. He says, "There's no doubt in my mind that a demon has been living in me, and since birth, as a child, I was fascinated with suicide, thought about throwing myself in front of cars. I was out of control. I was obsessed with Rosemary's Baby. I felt like it was speaking directly to me. I stayed in my closet. I ran from the light into darkness, as the Bible says. If people don't have a clue about spiritual things, they'll say, well, this guy is nuts. The devil can manifest psychologically. Looking at someone controlled by an evil spirit, you'd think that person's crazy. It's all hard to explain." In your own opinion, has he supplanted the perverse, horrific psychiatry, the sociopath, all of that, with a religious explanation?
Yeah, that is what he's done. David's gone through a series of explanations. The first one was that he was insane. 3 or 4 court-appointed lawyers found him unfit to stand trial. The next one is he actually cooperates with a psychiatrist who produces a book, and he talks about David's hatred of women in psychiatric terms. There's another explanation which emerges, which is that David was involved with a satanic cult based in Westchester, which actually was involved in the killings, so Berkowitz was not the lone gunman. Now we come to the present. David is a Christian, and he in some ways reimagines his past as a kind of Christian fable, in which what happens is the devil enters him and takes over him, and the fight is the biblical struggle between good and evil, in which David was once the satanic figure, and now, according to his story, has come into the light and is out there battling Satan. A battle in which, by the way, he says he has great advantages because he knows
he knows of what he speaks.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, he's got a lot of time to continue with the mission. All right. Let me go to Lisa. Lisa, who was the guy that you first met?
I think the man I met was very similar to the one Steve is describing. Sort of a tormented, almost innocent being who was no match for the powers of the devil. And I say this, by the way, not as someone who is bashing Christianity. I do take spiritual matters seriously, but there are elements to his conversion story that do not appear genuine.
All right, I want to play a soundbite from your interview with him talking about his delusions.
It was part of the delusion I was under. I was under a great delusion. Even though I knew right from wrong, it's like a part of you just kind of gives into it and doesn't question it, just kind of goes along. And it just seems at the time, it seemed to be making sense, and at the time, it didn't seem to be all that dangerous. In fact, I almost liked the meeting out of the darkness, the sense of a secret mission type thing.
So he talks about the delusions, but did he say even to you that they weren't really delusions, that it was only later he came to understand that it was truly the devil within him at work?
I think what he was saying essentially is that at the time he did not understand what was happening to him, and it was only later through his conversion that he was able to see the force that he had been no match for.
Okay, well, it's certainly evil, whether you want to call it satanic or sociopathic. Why do you say you suspect his conversion, Lisa?
Because I think that a real conversion from any person requires an examination of his own soul and what prompted him to do what he did. It can't simply be that some outside entity took control of him and he was no match for it. That seems, it just doesn't ring with authenticity or truth.
Well, it's a complete abdication of responsibility. Steve, does he benefit at all from this other than the attention, which I think he's always wanted?
He certainly doesn't benefit monetarily, and he's in prison and probably
Nobody's going to let him out. He's not.
Nobody's going to let him out. He's a model inmate. The prison authorities like him. He's trusted. He leads blind inmates around the prison. But he's not going to get out. I would say that the benefit that he accrues to him is that he's part of a community. He was a lonely killer, and now he's in the middle of this warm feeling of brotherly fellowship and Christian feeling, and that's actually a great benefit for somebody spending the rest of their lives in prison.
As long as he stays locked in that box, he can feel good all he wants. All right, Lisa Singh, Steve Fishman, fascinating stuff. Thanks very much.